Hey guys, welcome to the 13th episode of the Sports Zone podcast. I'm joined by Aslam here, getting ready to kick off another very exciting episode. We've got a lot in store for you. I know it's been, I think, about a week since we last recorded, so we do have a lot to talk about. So you do not want to miss the show. We're going to kick it off with some MLB, and then we're going to have our guest join us for the NHL segment. We're going to talk some basketball and some soccer, and then conclude our episode with the question of the week. Aslam, do you have anything to say?
Nope. Right into the MLB here. The Blue Jays are on fire. They're literally hot. They're burning. Josh Donaldson's absolutely killing the ball right now. I know today when they just won 6-0 against the Yankees, I just caught the highlights. Wasn't able to watch this game, but I am watching a lot of the Blue Jays games. They are absolutely playing well. I thought going into New York, they would have a really tough time there at Yankee Stadium. So what do you think is working for them? With obviously Tulo in the lineup, I believe they're 9-0 now.
Correct.
David Price obviously had an elite outing today. And R.A. Dickey, surprisingly, or maybe not surprising to you, has actually turned it around really well, and he has a 0.99 ERA in the second half of the season. What do you think has worked for them in relation or in comparison to the first half of the season? So you want to give us your thoughts on that?
Yeah, man. So the last time we talked, we were literally fresh off, David Price being acquired by the Blue Jays. I think it was the exact same day that it happened, and not too long after. And we were still, I know and I'm sure you and a lot of fans, we couldn't wrap our head around it. It was so fresh that, we were just in shock. But, when that move happened, I think if you look back to the Tulowitzki move, first of all, it was clear that, Tulowitzki was a good acquisition, but that they still wanted that, ace that could, take them to the next level because, that with the Blue Jays, that they were probably at least one or two pitchers away. And hence why I know in, many episodes before I was saying that, the Blue Jays, I'm not too sure about this season. They need to it's not just one move away. And, obviously the Blue Jays made quite a few moves, including some, big moves, in my opinion, on the last day. But yeah, man, the Blue Jays, oh my God, I don't even know how to express my emotions. It's been such a great, week or two here since the trade deadline. You make such a splash at the deadline and you just hope, that, it's obviously clear that the Blue Jays are going all out here. They're going all in. They want to end the streak of, the playoff drought. And, you can obviously see that, the Blue Jays are just, they're in sync. They're working in harmony. It's been so much fun to watch them. When you look at a team that does so well, usually you start with the pitching, and obviously you said it yourself. R.A. Dickey, I remember when he had to start on 3 days of rest because of the David Price acquisition, and he was terrific. I think that outing he only got 3 hits or something, and then just the other day he pitched against the Yankees and he was phenomenal once again. Marco Estrada has been pretty good. He has 9 wins now. I think he's really gained that confidence. People at the beginning of the year, especially considering he started out of the bullpen, he came into the rotation. I think people were really iffy about him, but he's been absolutely dominant. Definitely more than I think everyone expected. And now he's been doing it on a consistent basis, which is really nice to see. And then, it all starts and ends with David Price. He brings that attitude. He brings that swagger that the Blue Jays needed. I saw just today watching the Blue Jays game that, he bought scooters for, the whole, I think 10 or 11 scooters for his teammates because he likes to ride around to the game, with his scooters. And, I know he also bought, a jersey for a fan who sent him a picture of with the name Price taped onto the back. He's already a crowd favorite. I know I love having him in the dugout, in the clubhouse. And I especially love having him on the mound. This guy brings something that the Blue Jays haven't had since Roy Halladay, and then that's pretty clear. Especially when the Blue Jays are really hot right now, and obviously winning, 7 in a row here. David Price has only pitched twice in those days, so he hasn't been the only thing that's been working. But the pitching has definitely been a big part of it. You look at the bullpen. I think that's another big thing that we've seen. Obviously Aaron Sanchez. After serving his suspension, he's back now. Obviously, I'm not too sure if we touched about the brawl that happened, but I'm not going to go too much into that. But with him and Osuna in the back end of the bullpen, I think they've really found a spot for both of those guys. I like with Sanchez pitching the eighth, Osuna coming in for the ninth. I really like that duo there. And then you obviously have a more solidified bullpen with the acquisitions of Lowe and Hawkins. It's been great to see the bullpen, been shut down. Even Liam Hendricks, I've been really impressed with him. Someone who may be going under the radar. I think the only problem with the bullpen right now is probably Aaron Loop, and in my opinion, the only reason he's still here is because he's a left-hander, and the Blue Jays obviously need him. But he's been the only downside in the bullpen so far. And one more thing about the bullpen, if the Blue Jays, obviously, which is clear right now, if they're gonna make a serious run, and they are making a serious run, I think the bullpen is gonna have to be very solid. I know the rotation has been really good, but you got to make sure you don't have those situations with a lot of one run losses. I mean, those are obviously terrible. And then it all ends with the offense. I mean, the Blue Jays are, when you watch their offense, when you grow up as a kid, everyone loves the home run. And now, you get to see a team who basically relies all on the home run. I know today's game, they scored 6 runs and 5 runs were off home runs with the Smoke grand slam, obviously. And the Troy Tulowitzki home run. The other day when Batista hit the grand slam, there was a grand slam, a 3-run home run, and a 2-run home run. So obviously the Blue Jays, it's pretty clear they have the best offense in baseball. Josh Donaldson is having an MVP season, and I'm telling you right now, if it wasn't for Mike Trout, he's probably holding that MVP trophy at the end of the year. You said it yourself, Tulowitzki, you haven't lost to Tulowitzki. I think he's been great, especially defensively. I've really enjoyed watching him at shortstop. And it's definitely important to have a solid defense behind you. Looking at the Blue Jays right now, they're only 2.5 back of the Yankees as we speak. I think, when we look at it last week, the Blue Jays were 6 games back of the Yankees, and people were saying, only 13 games. It might not be too hard to catch up to them, but the Blue Jays are going to have to do really well against the Yankees to catch up. Well, now if I'm the Blue Jays, I'm thinking, we need to win the division. Obviously, the wild card is, the wild card, and you're not guaranteed anything because you have to play that 1-game playoff.
Hmm.
And obviously, the Yankees are not playing the best right now, so I think the Blue Jays have to be thinking the division. I know that with the Yankees coming in town, there's a lot of buzz here in Toronto. We have sold out crowds for the Yankee series. I know when David Price came here, it's probably the biggest game in 20 years. At the end of the day, the question is when will it end? Because obviously it is going to end. But right now, it'd be hard to say that the Blue Jays are even going to lose another game. Obviously heading in, to tomorrow's game facing Tanaka. I know Estrada is coming up on the mound there. I think that, he, along with many other pitchers now in this Blue Jays rotation, really feel a lot of confidence with our rotation. The only, I guess, thing that everyone's been talking about is Drew Hutchinson, who literally is getting 8 runs of support every game. But, the Blue Jays have a lot of off days, and they can really work around with the rotation. And, Hutchinson probably only has to pitch, another 5-6 games for the rest of the season. So, I think the Blue Jays are so hot right now, and I literally have been speechless this past week.
Oh, absolutely, man. Even myself, I know that I'm really happy, not only for you seeing the Jays win, I'm happy, myself seeing the Jays win. I just want to see a winner in Toronto, and it's kind of refreshing to see a team like the Blue Jays completely dominate like the way they're doing right now. It's extremely fun to watch. Obviously the Blue Jays, Alex Anthopoulos made a couple of moves that, weren't as highly publicized as the Tulowitzki and the Price deals. Ben Revere and Lowe, the reliever, coming in. I know Lowe had a kind of a bad debut, I guess you could say.
Hmm.
And Ben Revere had was off to a cold start, but I believe he's picked it up in the last couple of games here. What do you think about those two?
Well, Anthopoulos has said before, and I know this is a fact, that when they interviewed him, much earlier into the season, he said that, I'm going to be looking to, add to our team at the deadline, but I'm not the kind of guy who wants to make a move on the last day because, it's so bizarre, so many people on the move, and there's so much going on. Well, after the Blue Jays obviously acquired, Tulowitzki and David Price, losing your 2 top pitching prospects, many people thought that the minor league system, their prospects, they had I think people thought that they were going to, a little bit thinned out there, they didn't have really much any more attractive pieces that could be made to, make moves like the ones you talked about. But, obviously Anthopoulos made those two moves there. And I think that, I don't know if it's the right thing to say right now, but I think that those moves are going to be huge for the Blue Jays. You look at Lowe, when the Blue Jays acquired him, and I'm pretty sure he has an ERA just around 1. And I should repeat that, he has an ERA around 1. That is absolutely amazing. Like I said, you don't even need him in the ninth, eighth and ninth inning with Sanchez and Osuna there. he is definitely someone you love to have in your bullpen.
Hmm.
He has a very nasty slider pitch. Obviously that fastball slider combination.
Hmm.
And you said it, yeah, you're right. He didn't have the greatest debut, but he's been absolutely lights out since. I really love that acquisition, especially because, when you have such a good team, the bullpen at the end of the day is the guys who have to shut it down. And, it'd be a shame if the Blue Jays, didn't solidify their bullpen. And then you look at Ben Revere. I mean, this was a little bit interesting move here. And I should say, with Lowe and Revere, both of them, I think no one expected these moves. And even with Price and Tulowitzki, I think in Topless, the way he does this is he always makes these moves. No one knows about them. He's very, underground, undercover. No one hears about these things. I mean, out of nowhere, you Blue Jays acquiring Ben Revere, I think that was a really, really good move. I know he was just in town the week before with the Philly series, but I guess they probably didn't discuss there, but I really love Ben Revere. Obviously when he first got traded, a lot of people were discussing, is he going to be at the top of the lineup, at the bottom of the lineup? I know I was saying on Twitter, I know a lot of people noticed me talking about this before the deadline ended, that the Blue Jays, I would love to see, acquire someone with speed, obviously losing Jose Reyes. And they got Ben Revere. I think he's going to be a really good threat on the base paths, especially when you have a team hitting with such good offense. If I know he's at the bottom of the lineup, but when you have that speed, it's gonna really help your team, just as a little bit more, and not to say it's not good enough. Obviously he did not get off to a really good start, but I mean, he's our everyday left fielder now. He's going to be at the bottom of the lineup. He led the NL with the most hits in the NL. I mean, I mean, you just because he went like over whatever, I don't know, 12, whatever, to start the season, to start his season to start his stint as a Blue Jay. I don't think you should get too worried about that. He's going to get those big hits. He's going to get on base. And I think at the end of the day, I'm really happy to have him as our starting left fielder.
Perfect. So, I mean, I completely agree with you. A lot of his moves, Alex Anthopoulos' moves, absolutely come out of nowhere. Moving on, the lefty killer, Danny Valencia, was picked up by Oakland, I believe, a couple of days ago. And how big of a loss do you think that's going to be for the Jays, as a team and moving forward?
Well, I know Danny Valencia is obviously, a fan favorite, and I mean, I have a lot of respect for him. I do really think he is a really good player. And it's really when you're a ball club, fighting for the playoffs, someone like him, someone who can really hit lefties well, is really going to help your team. And it's definitely such an asset to have on your bench. That being said, with the acquisition, before Ben Revere was acquired, he was playing left field. You
Hmm.
could clearly see that he was very shaky in left field. It didn't look very good there. And I don't think that the Blue Jays would want him as an everyday left fielder. That being said, if he is on any other team, I don't think that he would have been, put on waivers and, got released, whatever, whatnot. But because the way the situation with the Blue Jays were in, obviously with acquiring Tulowitzki, and then you have Devin Travis, you have Ryan Goins. I think there was a lot of, and Colabello, obviously, and the Colabello, Edwin, and Smoke combination there. There's a lot of, players that are, can play, can help the ball club. I think Valencia or Colabello had to be to be the guy that had to go. Clearly, Colabello is the better hitter. And Danny Valencia, I think he's a very good player. Obviously, I think he's going to look good in the A's uniform. I know, obviously, him and Brett Lawrie coming back to Toronto in this coming week now. I mean, fans are still stunned, why he's gone. I think that, like I said, if he was any other team, I think he would have stayed there. But, at the end of the day, I think, obviously the Blue Jays making the move with, Pennington today. He's going to be a better infielder than Valencia would be in the infield if he was here. He's more versatile. He's a better defender. I believe he hasn't made an error all season. He's going to be another bench guy, but he's going to be an improvement over someone like Munenori Kawasaki. But yeah, I'm going to miss Valencia, but when you have such a team like the Blue Jays, when you have players like Trout, I mean like Tulo and David Price, and I mean you can't complain.
Awesome. So, do you start Marcus Stroman if he comes back? I know he's gonna be scheduled to start his rehab soon.
I mean, I know you probably know this already. I'm one of the biggest Marcus Stroman fans. I know he is my favorite player on the Blue Jays. He is the six himself, if I should say. At the beginning of the season, that was the biggest headline story, and losing Marcus Stroman. It was tough, definitely. Obviously, the Blue Jays have definitely rebounded without him. And it's really exciting to have an idea that he might actually come back in September. And obviously, we had heard at the beginning of the season that, he was going to try and make a September return. He had said it himself. If the Blue Jays were going to contend, that he would be a big part of it. To be honest, I mean, he's still a young stud. He's still the future. Obviously, if David Price leaves, he's probably our future ace. I'm very hesitant. I know, in the ideal world, he comes back and he's his normal self and he's, starting, and it would be so nice to have him and, Price obviously in the playoff rotation. But, when you have such a young kid, he's your future. I'm a little bit worried, to be honest. And I can tell you that if he does come back, I'd be very shocked to see him become a starter. Um, you know, Obviously you've seen with Sanchez and, even when Stroman come up, Blue Jays like to put these young guys in the bullpen to start off with. I think he would look really good in the bullpen. Um, I think that you look at, obviously with Hutchinson struggling, people are suggesting that, Stroman should come back and take his spot. I don't think they rush him. I don't think they know yet what they want to do with Stroman. But if Stroman does return, which is probably the sign now, obviously starting his rehab on the 21st, I think that he will probably make it to the bullpen and, maybe or maybe not will make a start in the playoffs if it comes to the point. But you definitely don't want to risk anything here just because of this whole buzz that you have in Toronto.
So, moving on to let's talk about some AA a little bit more. He's obviously the mastermind behind this whole Blue Jays rise kind of thing, and he's done a terrific job. Even if obviously we're hoping for him to win the World Series, he has created a huge hype around the Toronto Blue Jays, larger than I've ever seen before. Since I started watching sports, so around 15, 16 years back from what I can remember, this is the most hype I've ever seen. I know we try and get Blue Jays tickets, and it's kind of hard to even do that.
Hmm.
So what do you think that he's done well? What do you think is the future of the Blue Jays in the front office?
Well, I mean, you look at last season, and he was very criticized for his lack of moves in the off season, and especially last trade deadline. The Blue Jays were actually in a very good spot. But obviously, there were still people on the market, like David Price himself, and people were pleading, get David Price, get someone big. And obviously, at that time we were thinking that, no, maybe his job is on the line. This was obviously prior to the Donaldson acquisition, and it was pretty clear that he was thinking in the best of the organization. I mean, last year he could have easily, I shouldn't say easily, but he definitely had the pieces, to acquire someone like David Price.
Hmm.
But he clearly thought, obviously, and it's pretty obvious that some going after someone like that is not like at that time it wouldn't have been enough for the Blue Jays, obviously. And it would, if he did that, it would have seemed like he was trying to save his job because he obviously, if people are saying get David Price, he could have done it. He could have got David Price. People would be like, oh, he's so good, and we would have obviously he wouldn't have been we would have had a full season with him starting at this beginning of the year. And people would obviously be saying, like, maybe he's just doing this to save his job because he doesn't know how long he's going to be here. He had to do something. Well, you go into you look at this trade deadline, and I know that the asking price and what he's given up is pretty high. There's no doubt.
Hmm.
But you look at last year and you look at this year. Because you didn't make the David Price move, for example, last year. You got people like Jeff Hoffman to obviously mature in our organization. You got people like Daniel Norris to become a better prospect. People like Aaron Sanchez and Marcus Stroman, who have obviously become bigger parts of the major league roster, have become pieces that you probably aren't going to move, that maybe you would have moved before, because it's pretty clear like the asking price last year would have been probably a package of Stroman, Norris, and Sanchez, or two of those three. But this year, you could say that, oh, he's saving his job because we don't know how long he's going to be here. But first, let me say that, after you acquire someone like Josh Donaldson, I think we've all watched Josh Donaldson's play, and the fact that he was able to pull that move off. I mean, it might be a little bit silly for me to say this, and it might be a little bit biased for me to say this, but if I'm the MLB, I'm giving him the executive of the year. I think there is no there's no trade that's better than the Donaldson trade. I mean, what you give up for Donaldson and what Donaldson's been able to do, I think that's absolutely incredible. So moving on here, I mean, obviously, You look at David Price, and this year is a little bit different. Obviously, the Blue Jays were in a position where that move was definitely pivotal towards their success, which we have clearly seen. But he's also made moves like the Donaldson move, like the Tulowitzki move, like the Martin move, that are, they're secured for another 3, 4, 5 years. That you have those core pieces. You have Batista, you have Edwin coming back next year. You have a starting rotation. You have a lot of rookies on your team, young kids on their rookie contracts, like Stroman, like Sanchez, which obviously eats up some salary. I think he has to be. I think it's almost guaranteed that he does come back next year. Obviously Paul Beeston, he's gone next year. We obviously know that this is his last year as a president of the Toronto Blue Jays. Obviously with him going, Anthopoulos is most likely going to be the state. Obviously stay the GM. I don't think that he becomes the president despite his success. But you look at, other possible options for the GM or president thing. I think, you look at it, there's two ways to look at it. When you look at general managers, there's two types of people. There's a baseball GM and there's a business GM. And I think that people who have watched, Moneyball have obviously seen this clear concept here. Anthopoulos is a straight out baseball guy. He knows the baseball game. Obviously, he never was a player or anything, but he knows this game really well. Obviously, and we've seen the way he's handled this ball club. He's definitely done a really good job. And I think that, someone like him, I think is a very big asset. You look around the league, everyone talking about Alec Anthopoulos. I mean, he's one of the hottest names on the GM market that people can even think of. When you think of like top GMs right now in this league, I mean, he has made so much buzz, and especially if you make the playoffs, I mean, he's literally going to be the god for the Blue Jays. I mean, like people are going to be praising him for many years. That being said, I think there's a lot of rumors about his future, and obviously with Paul Beeston going, what's going to happen? A lot of people talking about Dombrowski. He was obviously, let go by the Tigers. A lot of people saying that, maybe he should come to the Blue Jays. Well, I don't think that's going to happen at all. I think that, he's made it pretty clear that he wants to be both the acting president and the GM, which is definitely hard actually because, as a president, obviously you got to manage all the, business aspects, going to, board meetings, representing Rogers, and then you got to do all the, business, baseball stuff on the other side with the acquisitions and stuff. I don't think he's an option for the Blue Jays. One person I think is very intriguing, is Billy Beane. I know obviously the Oakland situation is not very, very pretty there. I might be hard to see him leave in Oakland, but, like I said, it's not pretty there. They have some good prospects. Obviously Oakland Coliseum, there's a lot of problems with their stadium there. If he wants to move, there's definitely going to be suitors. I know the Yankees and the Red Sox in the past have obviously been interested in him. I think he's going to cost probably between $8 to $10 million if the Blue Jays were to get him away from Oakland. But I think, Anthopoulos is coming back in terms of, who the president's going to be. Maybe, obviously we saw Dan Duquette becoming a big part of the conversation at the beginning of this offseason when he was rumored to be a big deal that would have sent Jeff Hoffman there, which thank God we did because he turned into Troy Tulowitzki. But I think Anthopoulos comes back, and it's going to be very interesting to see who the new president is because obviously the hot topic is David Price, and the Blue Jays have that 5-year policy and whatnot. Maybe someone who comes in will be more inclined to look at signing him to a bigger deal, willing to spend more money, but. At the end of the day, Anthopoulos is the man, and he deserves a lot of credit for what he's done, and he definitely took a big gamble. And I have to say this because I have to say it. I mean, if the Blue Jays, they took a big gamble. There's very, very thin rotation they have. They have not very much depth. Obviously, you look at Hutchinson. People are saying, what are you going to do with Hutchinson? He's struggling. Who can you bring up? There's really nobody better than Hutchinson. And if someone like David Price or a person in our rotation gets injured, it's going to be very tough for the Blue Jays to compete. But, he's taking a big risk. But, when you have a playoff drought of 20 years on the line, I think it's worth it.
Awesome. So how do you see the rest of the season unfolding?
Well, I mean, it's very interesting. There's a lot of tight races. Obviously, looking at the Blue Jays, they're probably one of the biggest ones. But obviously, moving on from the Blue Jays, a lot of people are talking, they're talking about the Chicago Cubs and the San Francisco Giants, in the NL. Obviously, both contending teams, and rightfully so. They have some very good pieces there. Obviously, we know with the Giants, what to expect from them. They're a very solid team. They always find ways to win. They always have a young player who's become, such a big part of their success. Obviously we've seen with Angel Pagan, and then obviously this year with Joe Panic. I think that, the Cubs obviously is supposed to be a very exciting team. Chris Bryant obviously, he finally made his debut. You have some very exciting prospects there with, Kyle Schroeder. And then you have John Lester there. You have, Soler. You have the whole Castro situation. some very, very young, talented pieces. You have Joe Madden. And I didn't think the Cubs were going to be a total contender. I'm actually very happy to see them contending here. And I know those are the two big teams there. I think obviously you look at the Cubs, they're going to be, in tight with, St. Louis and Pittsburgh, obviously with their division and all. I think they're going to fall short. I don't think they're active enough at the deadline. I think that, they shouldn't be upset because I think they still have a very, very bright future that may include David Price in the next year. But I think that the Giants are going to probably win the wild card there, and I think the Dodgers are obviously winning the NL West. With that being said, obviously another thing that people are talking about is obviously the Mets and the Washington Nationals. I think that they're obviously going back and forth there with first place. Nobody saw the Mets being this good. I mean, I know I didn't, at least. And for that matter of fact, when I think about it, my off-season article that I wrote about predicting about this MLB season is way off now. But the Mets have been absolutely incredible. It's all been about amazing pitching. Obviously, acquiring Yoenis Cespedes, I think that's a huge move for their team. Obviously, I don't think he returns back next year. I think he's going to actually go back to the Tigers, which would be pretty cool. But they finally found that big hitter. David Wright is coming back. And the Nationals are really struggling. I mean, the rotation is supposed to, everyone was saying that they're favorites to win with, acquiring Scherzer, and you have Strasburg and you have Zimmerman. They have definitely not been what they're supposed to be. You look at Ian Desmond, he has been an absolute, terrible at shortstop. I know Escobar's been pretty good, and Harper for sure. But, I think that's going to be a really fun race to watch at the end of the year. I do think that the Mets actually are going to come out on top, just the way that I've been seeing them play lately. The Rangers are obviously hot, acquiring Cole Hamels. At the time, I didn't think it was going to be a move about this year. I think it was more of a future move, but he could actually end up being a big part of what they're going to do. Obviously, going in tight there with the Astros. I know they just swept them this past week. So I think this is going to be interesting to watch. I don't know if they're going to make a serious push. They have some good pieces. I think they're going to fall short. But one team actually I'm very surprised with is because obviously they're becoming more of a spotlight with the Blue Jays is the LA Angels. Obviously, they hold the wild card with the Blue Jays. They're obviously in a really big struggle. I think they've won 3 of the last 10 games. I know Mike Trout just celebrated his 24th birthday, but things there aren't very pretty, and if they don't turn it around, there's gonna be a lot of teams fighting for that wild card. You have the Orioles, you have the Rays, you have the Rangers, you have the Astros. So I mean, this next couple of 50 games, whatever left we have here, it's definitely gonna be fun to watch.
Absolutely. So, want to move on to the NHL?
For sure, man.
So, Patrick Kane, I'm not going to go too deep into this just because I don't want to get into any legal trouble myself. Patrick Kane is in a bit of legal trouble. Patrick Kane did actually hire an attorney in the case involving him in an incident that did happen next weekend, and it is said to be a very serious allegation against him. So it's going to be interesting to see how this progresses forward. If the allegations are true, you can obviously read about this online. It could be huge for the Chicago Blackhawks. He could be out for an extended period of time, if he does prison sentences. Jonathan Bernier received a 2-year deal with $4.1 million, from the Toronto Maple Leafs, kind of like a show me deal, I guess. It's going to be interesting to see how he performs next season. With kind of a deflated defensive core without Cody Franz, it's going to be interesting to see how he battles back and pushes James Reimer to his fullest. And you know what they kind of said, perform and take me to the bank, basically is what the Toronto Maple Leafs are saying. So they really want him to, perform well, and you know what, they're really ready to pay up.
For sure. Before we move on here, let me just ask you quickly. Obviously, Patrick Kane obviously is the top topic on the news right now. Obviously you look at players getting in trouble. There's obviously been so many cases in the the little while that has gone by. Obviously, at the NFL, there's a lot of players, a lot of players getting in trouble. Obviously, we saw Scott on the Hawks in the NBA getting in trouble. Obviously, Tom Brady, in the NFL. But obviously, this is more of a personal issue. And I know I was speaking to our past guest Noah off air about this before today, actually. And I was wondering, and I thought maybe you would know. Obviously, because this is a personal issue, obviously the NHL will probably not have to do any, suspensions or, consequences for him. I think it obviously falls into the hands of the Blackhawks. Now, obviously, he is your star player. There's no doubt about that. But what do you think, if this is true? Obviously, we are assuming it's true, and it could easily not be true. But what do you think the Blackhawks would do in terms of giving him a penalty of some sort? To obviously because of this move, I think what do you think that the Blackhawks will do Does that mean suspending him? Does that mean I don't know what are they gonna do? I don't know.
Well, if he does get charged and the allegations against him are strong, the Chicago Blackhawks are in fact conducting their own independent investigation. If they do find that Patrick Kane
Yeah.
is in serious trouble, they'll absolutely suspend him.
Yeah.
I know NHL contracts are guaranteed, as in comparison to NFL contracts, which are non-guaranteed deals, or at least portions of it are only guaranteed, while others are not guaranteed. I think that he would get suspended. I believe, I'm not too sure about this. It's written in the CBA about how it kind of works, but I know the LA Kings, when they suspended Slava Voinov for his domestic violence case, they kind of got the cap room back. And they are expected to receive Slava Voinov, I believe, as early as next season, maybe the season after. So, I believe just the duration on his deal is cut off, but the Blackhawks would definitely suspend him if they think that anything, major is going to happen to Patrick Kane, because they don't want bad press on them at all. So, I wouldn't be surprised if Patrick Kane, nothing comes of this, or I wouldn't be surprised if he's suspended either. But in either way, it's going to look bad on him if for the future.
For sure. I think, obviously because he is such a, superstar and stud in the NHL. I mean, if it was any other player who was probably not as good, I think that maybe teams would be more hesitant. And, they obviously don't want to look bad, and maybe they would even release the player if they weren't as caliber as obviously Kane is. But I think obviously you're right. I think that a suspension might make more sense. But what can you tell us about the World Junior Showcase camp coming up? Obviously, Canada is the host. Obviously, Marner is actually going to be a big part of that. What can you tell us from an NHL perspective?
Well, it actually just concluded this past week, the four-game series, two against the Czechs, two against the Czechs, two against the Russians.
Yeah,
The actual tournament will be in Finland, and that's around Christmas time as usual.
yeah.
And from what we saw in this tournament, Braden Point was definitely for Team Canada. I looked at for him to be the captain. And he just absolutely tore it up. I believe he averaged more than 2 points per game in those series. He was just pinging passes all over the ice, dominating the game. The next person I look for is Travis Konechny. He was the
Hmm.
24th overall pick from the Philadelphia Flyers. Obviously, that's the pick that the Toronto Maple Leafs traded down for and drafted Travis Dermott, who was also a part of this camp and also performed very well. He scored a goal in the second game of the tournament and looked extremely steady on the back end. And then lastly, the fourth overall pick for my Maple Leafs, Mitch Marner. He was actually pointed out by Craig Button, the TSN hockey analyst, as probably one of the best players. He was voted the best player in Game One
Oh.
of the World Juniors Camp Showcase.
Hmm.
And in Game Two, the second game that he played, was just as effective. We clearly saw the ability for him to create space, and he creates space because defenders kind of back off of him because they're not really sure what he's going to do. He's such an unpredictable player. Terrific hands. He definitely looks a little bit weak, so that's what he's going to have to do to move on to the next level. But the NHL skills are definitely there. The NHL skill, the NHL skating, the NHL elusiveness is definitely there. So it's going to be extremely interesting to see what happens next season with him. And I think he ends up in London again.
For sure, man. So obviously, when you talked about it at the beginning and when we introduced this podcast, we have a very special guest joining us. So why don't we bring him on?
So we are joined by a very special guest here. We have Doug. He's actually the host of Sheehan Sports Hour on VictoryLaneRadio.com. He has this show on Wednesday at 9 p.m. You can go and check him out live, or I believe he posts it up on SoundCloud afterwards. I know I've been listening, and it's a terrific show that you should definitely catch up on if you're a sports fan, and obviously, or if you're listening to this podcast. So, Doug, how's it going?
It's going really great, man. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yep, thanks for coming on. So let's get right into it. Obviously, with you being a Boston Bruins fan, how do you think of how GM Doug Sweeney how has he done so far in the offseason? What do you think of the Milan Lucic, Dougie Hamilton deals? I know those were two blockbusters that happened near the deadline. Near the draft. And where do you see them placing, obviously, with a kind of new look team? I know that they had three draft picks back to back to back, and I believe that's the first time in NHL history that actually happened at the draft. And Milan Lucic, for me personally, I mean, he embodied what the Boston Bruins were. He's like this big, tough, skilled kind of guy. Have huge respect for him. Love the way that he plays. And then Dougie Hamilton, obviously a young stud. We're not exactly sure what happened to him. It obviously was not about the money. why he left Boston, but it should be a big loss for Boston. I'm not sure how they're going to compensate for that. Maybe you can tell us about how Boston plans to deal with the loss of Dougie Hamilton. So what do you think?
Well, if we'll start with the Dougie Hamilton trade, like you mentioned. He was a real core piece to the Bruins, what they were going forward with. When Chara retired, every Bruins fan was like, okay, we get Dougie, he's going to be the leader of defense.
Hmm.
Obviously, there was something else behind the scenes that we don't know about, because he turned down an offer, if I'm not mistaken, it was only 250 grand more per year.
Yeah.
He turned that down for Boston and signed that deal in Calgary. So there was something going on. I know a lot of people complained about Sweeney dealing Hamilton because he didn't feel out offers too much, but
Hmm.
I think he got a decent return. He got that pick, which turned into Zach Senyshyn, who should be a decent prospect. I really am not sure how he's going to turn out, because apparently, from what I heard, I didn't know this going when they picked him, but he wasn't supposed to get picked until late second round.
Hmm.
So I don't know how that's going to turn out, but overall, if Dougie didn't want to play here, it's good that we got him out. That's personally how I feel. Now, regarding Lucic, you said it perfectly. The Boston fan inside of me loved Milan Lucic on the team, the way he played ever since his opening. You see the video of his opening shift where he immediately goes after, I believe, Nate Thompson, and they get into a huge fight. And you saw that his whole career, except, last year, you saw little spurts where he kind of just didn't seem like himself, and he pulled bonehead moves off, like when he, speared De Kaiser. Just
Hmm.
things that's not the Lucic that we knew. And again, the fan in me was really disappointed we moved him, but looking at it from the outside, including the trade with the Sharks, Boston got back so much more. They picked up, with the draft pick from Los Angeles, they got Jacob Zboril, who's supposed to be a solid defenseman. I
Hmm.
don't know if he can replace Dougie Hamilton, but I think he can be solid. You
Yeah.
look at Martin Jones, who they got back as well, and Martin Jones, they end up flipping into another prospect and a first-round pick, which, for all intents and purposes, should be a lottery pick next year from the Sharks, assuming they don't really turn things around. So
Hmm.
from a hockey standpoint, looking at the big picture, I think we got a ton for Lucic in return, and I really think trading him was the right move in that instance. I don't know why. Again, unless the homer portion of being a Bruins fan overwhelms the outlook on it, I guess you could say. Really, moving Lucic was the right move, I think, that Sweeney made. And going into next year, the team is solid. The offense is much better. I think one of the more underrated moves the Don Sweeney made was not when he traded with Florida, he moved Riley Smith to Florida, not the actual Mark Savard dumping of his contract,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
getting back Jimmy Hayes. I think that's a very underrated part, because, I mean, just looking at the stats, Jimmy Hayes put up 19 goals on a Florida team, where Riley only put up 13 on a Bruins team. And how Riley Smith was projected coming back from that Sagan trade, you expected much more out of him. So
Hmm.
I think that was the most underrated move Sweeney's made. And when they hired Sweeney as the GM, I didn't like it, because I thought they needed to go out of house and bring somebody new in. But when he made these moves, at first you were kind of skeptical because you didn't know what was going to happen, especially after the Hamilton move. Everyone was kind of shocked here, seeing that. But all in all, I think he's done a really good job, and he's done much more than Chiarelli had done in most of his tenure here, just in a couple months.
Awesome. Yeah, so I completely agree with you. I thought the Milan Lucic deal was absolutely incredible for Boston. Essentially returning two first-round picks and a couple of prospects. That is a really good return for an upcoming UFA who I don't know if Boston was going to pay him the money that he wanted in a year when he hits the open market. I know that I expect him to get at least like six, probably seven, maybe even more than that long term with the Bruins and or whatever team he ended up signing for. I know that players like Lucic probably they end up tending to slow down just because just because of the way that he plays. He battles in front of the net and the physical nature of the game, especially, might have taken a toll on him. So I'm not too sure if they wanted to keep him around long term, especially at the dollar amount that he might have commanded on the open market. Um, From the next NHL, from last NHL season, we saw the breakout of Vladimir Tarasenko as one of the league's top snipers, and he actually got a huge, massive extension from the St. Louis Blues, which I thought was incredibly deserved. Um, and he's just a human highlight reel. In short, I mean, you saw the one-handed goals he put up last season, a couple of them, one in the playoffs. He's an absolutely incredible young talent. No idea how he slipped to 16th overall to the St. Louis Blues, probably just because of the Russian factor. They didn't know whether he's going to come over to the NHL or not, but he looks like an absolute stud. Probably going to improve on his numbers. Terrific underlying numbers. So who do you think is a player that is going to break out this season in the NHL and kind of be this year's Tarasenko?
Uh, Immediately when I heard breakout player, I thought of two players, and they both had just signed big deals, big extensions to return, and those two guys were Alex Galchenyuk and Jacob, or is it Jakob or Jacob Silfverberg?
Yeah.
I don't know how they pronounce that, but point is, both of them, I mean, Silfverberg specifically, you saw him in the playoffs last year with Anaheim. He went off in the playoffs, a point per game through those 16 games. And despite in the regular season, he didn't put up too much. I think he had about 40 points. You get that sense that he's that next big name in Anaheim with Getzlaf and Perry. They're not too old. You can't really say they're getting older, but they've been there, and they need this a new spark for the team. And I think Silfverberg can absolutely produce that now, especially knowing that he's locked in for another 4 years. He doesn't have to worry about contracts. He just knows who he's playing for and what he has to do to help that team succeed. And the other player I mentioned, Alex Galchenyuk, he did solid. Again, he's got to live with that burden of being the third overall pick back in 2012. So he's still only 21 years old. He still has a 10, 15-year career in front of him, barring any crazy injuries. And last year he put up 46 points. That Habs team is a great team. You saw last year, again, maybe they relied a little too much on Price come playoff time, but that team all around is a good team, and I really think Galchenyuk, especially adding Semin now, that's just another player. If he's paired with Galchenyuk, that they could put up some serious points.
Awesome. Yeah, I completely agree with both of those selections, actually. I mean, if Silverberg gets the opportunity to play with Getzlaf and Perry now that he's established himself a little bit, he could put up some major numbers. I know you guys signed actually Matt Bolesky, Boston did, so he might actually take that spot on the top line with Getzlaf and Perry. And for Galchenyuk, I know we've been saying he's going to break out for a long time, but if he actually does get some time to play center, and with wingers like Semin and Prust, maybe, Gallagher, or Pacioretty, if he even gets that opportunity instead of, David Desharnais is kind of past his prime now, he could definitely put up a point per game, and I wouldn't be surprised at all. So Habs fans should definitely look out for him. Adam, you want to ask the next question?
For sure. So Doug, obviously, awesome asked you there about the breakout player. Another thing, obviously, people like to talk about before the season starts are some teams that obviously can break out. Obviously, we saw last year, Calgary Flames were very solid there. Can you come up with some teams that maybe have some really solid pieces, maybe some young pieces that can, surprise a lot of people this season?
Well, the first team I thought of would be, they were a playoff team last year, but the Winnipeg Jets, I don't think they got a fair shake in the playoffs. They weren't. They seem like, they were fresh off that Evander Kane trade, and I think they had so much more to show, and they just couldn't get it together in the playoffs. But the number one thing that stands out to me about the Winnipeg Jets is their defense. Assuming Byfuglien stays, I know there's been a bunch of rumors of him moving, but you look at their top six, and I'm not sure the line combinations they'll roll with, but they have Byfuglien, Tobias Enstrom, Tyler Myers, Mark Stewart, Jacob Trouba, and either Jay Harrison or Adam Party.
Yeah.
That's a really, really good top six, an underrated top six. I don't think a lot of people will mention that when they are going over some of the best defenses in the league. But you look at, they have a solid goalie in Andrei Pavlovic. They also have Michael Hutchinson, who came out of nowhere. He seemed like a pretty solid goalie. He was in Boston for a while, didn't really get a fair shake in Boston, goes over to Winnipeg, and he seems to be getting some good playing time and, producing well in goal for them when Pavlovic is Pavlov. I can't say it. Pavlik. There we go. Takes some time. And you got Alexander Burmistrov coming back this year. It'll be interesting to see again. It's so weird because to me Burmistrov, a fixture with the Jets, and then I realized he's only 23 years old. He still has a whole career ahead of him. Like I mentioned with Galchenyuk, this team could do well. Andrew Ladd, another guy underrated in the league, Brian Little, and they have young players like Mark Scheifele, again, Burmistrov. This team can, I think, surprise a lot of teams, and they made the playoffs last year when I didn't think they were 100% together. And now having a full off season and eventually a full season with this core and any other small moves they make, I think they can really make a surprise run in the playoffs.
For sure. Very good, man. So obviously talking about the main attraction here, first overall pick, Connor McDavid. Obviously going to the season, I know obviously a lot of people are talking about how he's going to perform, whether there's a lot of pressure on him and whatnot. What do you think? What can we expect from him in his first full season with the Oilers?
Well, you immediately look at McDavid because his whole career in juniors he was compared to Sidney Crosby, and he didn't. He wasn't kidding with his point totals. I mean, he put up 120 points last year in only 47 games. That's unbelievable. That's almost 3 points per game. And the same with in the playoffs, he went off too. But if you want to talk specific numbers, I expect a huge season from him because that Edmonton team, if that Edmonton team was in the CHL, I would be convinced they could go close to undefeated because that's like the CHL All-Star team from the last 5 or 6 years. So that talent is there. It's just putting it together, and I think a true center, a true talent like Connor McDavid can put that team together. Now, with the decline in points, you can't say he's going to put up 100 points. Maybe 10 years ago he could have, 5 years ago. I really expect to see 65, 70 points from him. Hopefully he stays healthy because that'll be great for the city of Edmonton because they've had those number one picks, but besides Taylor Hall, none of those top picks really seemed like top picks. And now they're getting a guy like Connor McDavid who going in can single-handedly change the entire face of this franchise and change the whole direction of it over the next coming years.
Yeah, man. So one of the things I actually am curious to see about McDavid is he going to get insulated as a second line center behind Ryan Nugent-Hopkins in Edmonton? Ryan Nugent-Hopkins obviously I think he's coming into his 4th or 5th season now. He was drafted first overall back in 2011. That was considered kind of a weak draft year, but Ryan Nugent-Hopkins has absolutely progressed well. He's definitely a number one center in the NHL, so it's going to be interesting to see how, he kind of helps McDavid learn the ropes in the NHL, and I fully expect him to be the Oilers' number one center by the end of the season. It's just going to be a question of whether the defense, obviously anchored by Andrej Sekera, can pick up the slack, and it's definitely improved under Peter Chiarelli, so going to be really interesting to see what McDavid does in the NHL. I don't think his goal totals are going to be up to what people expect them to be, but I definitely expect assists. And, the biggest beneficiary I see of Connor McDavid being in Edmonton is actually Nail Yakupov. A lot of people writing him off as a bust, being the first overall pick back in 2012 when you had the likes of Galchenyuk, Hampus Lindholm, Jacob Trouba, Morgan Riley even, Thomas Hertl picked after him. He's going to definitely blow up, I think. He's going to be a breakout candidate as well. I could see him potting 30 goals probably next season if he plays next to Connor McDavid with Connor's elite vision and passing ability. So just jumping in there.
For sure, man. So, Doug, obviously it'd be a shame to have you come on in this episode and not ask you who you think is going to win the Stanley Cup. I know it's obviously very, very hard to predict, and obviously so much is going to happen with trades and whatnot. But if you had to pick someone, who do you think wins the Stanley Cup?
The first team I think a lot of people will think of would be the Tampa Bay Lightning just because of how young they are, how far they managed to get last year. You look at Steven Stamkos, he's just a bona fide superstar in the NHL. I'd say right now, over Chicago, I think Tampa Bay would be my number one pick to win the Cup next year. Again, you can't count Chicago out. They always seem to be in it. I think even losing Brandon Saad, I really don't think they lost too much. Immediately in that trade, they got back Artem Anisimov, and he's a solid. He's not Brandon Saad. I think he can produce just enough for him. Plus, he can play center, which would be nice for him. But I look to Tampa Bay. I look at Chicago. Pittsburgh, of course, you can't count. They got Phil Kessel. I mean, that team is going to be offensively overloaded. Hopefully, they can make up for it on defense. And yeah, I don't think I see too many surprises necessarily until you can't really pick surprise until the season goes to see who's that up and coming team. But
Yeah.
I don't think there's too many surprises this year. I think Tampa Bay is gonna. I've picked them since last June. On my show I have Tampa Bay written down as my President's Trophy winner. So I really think they're gonna have a successful year, and I don't see why not. They didn't lose anybody worth noting to my knowledge, and they only made their team better. So.
It's going to be actually really interesting to see. I mean, I completely agree with Tampa Bay. I definitely expect them to be Stanley Cup contenders, but I think now that Steven Stamkos actually hasn't signed a contract and is heading into his UFA year, that might be a big story in Tampa Bay. And you know what? As crazy as it sounds, I would not be shocked to see him moved at the deadline just because you cannot lose Steven Stamkos for nothing. Especially with Nikita Kucherov, Andrej Palat, and Tyler Johnson being such an effective line. There's a huge debate on whether, Steven Stamkos is actually needed in Tampa Bay. Obviously he is a bona fide superstar, but that whole, Stammergeddon, I guess that's what they're calling it, Stammergate, the contract situation involving Steven Stamkos might be a huge thing that overshadows the Tampa Bay Lightning season. So I definitely consider them a favorite in the East, and I think in the West I completely agree with the Blackhawks. So moving on to the last question here, a lot of the NHL players and even MLB and NFL, NBA players, a lot of pro athletes nowadays use Twitter and other forms of social media, Facebook, Instagram. Sometimes, when used correctly, it can be a really effective tool for interacting with fans, and other times when not used properly, it can blow up in your face. What is your opinion on athletes and players using social media, whether that be Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook?
I think at this point, the way the world seems to be going, if they're not on social media, they're not helping themselves. Because, again, they're sort of selling themselves as a product, whether they want you to buy their gear, buy tickets to see their team play, to see the individual player play. I think it's not a smart move not to be on social media. Personally, I love it because I've talked to plenty of athletes over the last couple of years since I got on Twitter. I've spoken with Alex Galchenyuk, now that we were just mentioning him. I've talked to plenty of hockey players and just little things here and there, but I think as a fan, and I can even imagine if I was, 9 or 10 having something like that happen, that would be awesome. They'd all be my favorite players forever, and I'd always buy all their jerseys and whatever. But I think, the way everything's moving with technology, I don't see why they wouldn't be on social media. I think it can only benefit them, assuming they know how to use it. Now, everyone's going to make mistakes with social media. Things are going to, people are going to say things, the whole read before you tweet or think before you tweet sort of thing.
Yeah.
That's going to happen, but, for the most part, people just need to take that stuff with, a grain of salt and just let it go when people make mistakes. And, that whole Sagan thing when he made that comment about Texas when he got traded to Dallas, whether it was him or somebody hacked it, it's wall water under the bridge. I don't think the Stars fans care anymore because he's producing for him and he's bringing a show to Dallas. So I think they should all be on it, and I think if used properly, it can only benefit them.
For sure. Well, Doug, we really, really, really do appreciate you coming on to our episode here. We want to thank you for your time, and, guys, make sure you check him out on victorylaneradio.com. Doug, I know it's going to be a wonderful NHL season, and hopefully we'll have you on for a future episode.
Absolutely. I love talking hockey, and my show is about all sports, so I have to make sure I cover all sports, but my number one sport is hockey. So anytime you guys want me on, I'd love to give you a Boston Bruins fan perspective, because I know outside of Boston, people think, differently about Bruins fans. So I like giving my perspective.
For sure. And I don't think we need to bring up the whole Boston Leafs story here, because, Leafs fans don't like that. For sure. Well, thanks again, and we'd hope to have you on again for sure.
Not a problem. Thanks for having me.
Take care. So moving on to the NBA here, pretty much real quick here. Obviously, not much to talk about. The Raptors, obviously, they haven't been very active since we last talked. But one thing that a lot of people are starting to talk about is, the whole situation that they have at the 4 spot at the starting power forward. Obviously we acquired Bismack Biyombo. I don't think that he is probably our starter. Does that mean Patrick Patterson is the starter? I think if we had to say it right now, assuming no more moves happened at the end of the season, Is Patterson the guy that's going to start? Probably. But does that mean there's no other move that the Raptors can make? Obviously, there are still some players on the market. I know Tristan Thompson obviously hasn't signed, but I'm pretty sure he's guaranteed to go. It's pretty much a guarantee that he ends up, going to the Cavs. But what do you think about Patterson? Would you be comfortable with him starting the four? Obviously, I'm pretty sure you would agree with me that we would like to see a nice acquisition. Obviously, we can't get LaMarcus Aldridge, but what do you think about the whole situation there?
Well, obviously, I think we both kind of hated a bit on Amir Johnson in his time in Toronto on this podcast, just a little bit for his
Hmm.
lack of defensive play. And you know what? He didn't really make up for it on the offensive end. So, but he is a terrific player, for sure. He was awarded with a big contract with the Celtics. So I'm really not comfortable with Patrick Patterson, the starting power forward. I was comfortable with Amir Johnson a little bit. I definitely think we need to upgrade that position, but that position with Biombo and Patterson looks extremely weak for me. I can't see the team going really far in the playoffs with Patrick Patterson as the starting four.
For sure, man. And then obviously, the Raptors obviously have a lot of, point guards, in the situation now, obviously with Lowry and Joseph, and then obviously Powell and, Wright. What do you think about our backcourt? I know obviously everyone talks about, DeMar and Lowry. Obviously both I'm expecting to have bigger seasons. You also have Carroll. What do you think is going to play out there?
So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens there, especially with Carroll. I think the Raptors are going to run Lowry and Corey Joseph in the same backcourt with DeRozan at the three and Carroll at the four and Valanciunas at the five. Just because they don't have that power forward, I think Carroll can play that four position. And you know what? They might run. There might be a little bit of a small lineup, but I think that the athleticism of this lineup makes up for it. Corey Joseph, you know what? Uh, since they brought him in, we kind of questioned him on this questioned Masai Ujiri on this podcast of how Delon Wright, I believe that was his name, the backup point guard we drafted in this past draft, how he's going to fit into the equation with Corey Joseph now becoming a member of the Toronto Raptors on that kind of big contract. I believe he's making $7 million per season on a 4-year deal. But if he is a starter, I could definitely see that working out. I think Corey Joseph is absolutely a better player than Terrence Ross, so it might actually work out for them to play small.
For sure. I think it's gonna be very interesting. I think, obviously we see Powell obviously tearing it up in in the summer league, but I think that the season obviously I think it's gonna be a little bit of an experiment. Obviously, even with Patterson at the four, I think Joseph, if he's gonna start at the two, I think it's gonna be a matter of what works and doesn't work. I think obviously with Vasquez and Lou Williams last year, we obviously saw them in the backcourt sharing time with Kyle Lowry. I'm not too sure about your thoughts about that, but you're definitely right. I don't think Ross is definitely a starter anymore. I still think that the Raptors should be looking to move him for something at least. But I think it's going to be interesting to see what the Raptors do. Obviously, with Carroll in the lineup, obviously his defense is going to be a big part of what the Raptors do. And I think Dwayne Casey is going to have a big part of that.
Absolutely. So another piece of big news coming out of Utah is actually Dante Exum tore his ACL, I believe, and he's out for the season. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, you look at the Utah Jazz. Obviously, Exum coming from Australia, he's been, I think he was the fifth pick last year. I'm not too sure on that one. But I think he's probably a big part of their future. They have a very, very bright future. You look at Dante Exum, you look at Trey Burke, obviously Gordon Hayward. I'm not sure if Derek Favors is still there, but then you have the beast in Rudy Gobert, which I know Agent Zero likes to talk about on his podcast. I mean, on his YouTube channel, sorry. But I think that obviously the Jazz are still in a rebuilding, retool situation. The West is too competitive. I don't see them competing. I think they're probably still another couple of top draft picks away. I think it's a big loss. I think Exum loses out on probably a good year to build his name, build his his skills. But I don't think it's a big move, a big deal. What about you?
No, I actually think that it might be a big deal for the Utah Jazz. I think that for Dante Exum might be a bigger deal for him in
Hmm.
his development year. So I'm going to have to disagree with you on that. Last thing we want to talk about here, Kevin Durant, I believe he's coming into his contract year now. What do you think it would take for him to actually leave Oklahoma City? Would it be a first round exit, another missed playoffs? Maybe Russell Westbrook and him don't get along. Maybe they make it to the finals but lose again. What do you think it would take for him to leave?
I think it's really tough. I know we're going to probably be talking a whole lot about this in the coming podcast. Obviously with the NBA season coming around. I mean, KD obviously is probably everyone knows he's the big deal there. I know Russell Westbrook's future as OKC Thunder is obviously in the air as well. Obviously his contract's coming up to an end if I'm not mistaken. I mean, I know if I'm Katie, I want to finish off strong. I think if he does get injured this season, it would be tough for him to, finish the season injured and that just end his career as a Oklahoma City Thunder. I know I read an article the other day of what it would take for the Warriors to acquire him. Probably a package that included probably Klay Thompson, Harrison Barnes, and their first round pick. I don't know if I don't know. I don't think they would do that. I think you're gonna see a lot of that. A lot of people saying, "Oh, what would it take to get this? What would it take to get that?" Because at the end of the day, if OKC feels that KD's gonna leave, obviously it'd be wrong for them not to explore some trade options. Because I don't think anyone can put a package that'd be so good, but as good as him. But they can definitely bring in a lot. Um, First round exit. I think his eyes are definitely on the prize here. I think missing the playoffs. I think is gonna be a bigger deal than a first round exit. I know he expects the playoffs. I expect the playoffs. I think if he's healthy, I think that OKC goes far in the playoffs. But I have to give you my early predictions. I say KD either stays or he ends up in as a Washington Wizard. What about you?
I completely agree. I think that this is going to be a huge year for the Oklahoma City Thunder. This could actually be a disastrous year for the Thunder. Imagine them going into the season with Westbrook and Durant and leaving without both of them.
Yeah, I
Um,
can imagine.
that could be disastrous for their franchise. I think that this is going to be a really big year for this team. They've been contenders for the NBA championship for a very long time. It's time for them to either put up or shut up for me. So
For
you want to
sure.
move on to
Yeah, for sure. I think, I have to point this out as a Blue Jay fan. And I know this is probably unrelated at the moment, but obviously with the OVO concert this past weekend, um, Kevin Durant was at David Price's
absolutely.
Blue Jay start. He was at he was at OVO Fest, standing beside DeMar DeRozan with a David Price jersey, his brand new jersey. I'm sorry I had to bring that out, but I thought that was absolutely incredible, and I can only imagine, you have someone like David Price, telling Stephen Curry how good our popcorn is. Maybe Kevin Durant can become a Raptor. Just imagine a Blue Jays team with David Price for the next 8 years, and a Raptors team with Kevin Durant. I think that Toronto would be the best city in the world. I think that our whole sports situation, we were talking about who's going to win first, who's not going to win. Obviously the Leafs, obviously still a couple of years away, but I think that'd be a dream come true if they both became. But I think we're getting a little bit out of our shoes here.
Stamkos and Durant to Toronto in 2016, man.
And David Price, I think oh
Oh,
man,
absolutely, David
holy
Price.
moly. Why not? Why not let it fly? All right. So, moving on here. I know we've talked about we talked some soccer in an earlier episode. I think this is going to be the second time we've talked about it. Soccer is definitely the biggest sport in the world. I think it'd be a shame not to talk about it. Premier League obviously started today. It is obviously a huge deal, and I know obviously you have the rundown for us. Why don't you start about talking about what you expect for this Premier League? Maybe give us some ideas on the top four teams and what to expect.
Well, I think that first place is actually going to surprise a bit of people. I think it's actually going to be, barring Sergio Aguero stays healthy, I think it's going to be Manchester City.
Hmm.
They obviously had that huge transfer, Raheem Sterling. I think it was around 49 million euros, pounds actually. So probably the most expensive English player of all time. I think Raheem Sterling is, and he adds to that team with a little bit of creativity. Now I think that Manchester City might run two strikers again, Boney and Aguero. Obviously, Aguero I think is the best player in the Premier League right now, let alone the best striker. He's probably one of the best players in the world. But he has dealt with a huge amount of injury concerns. It's going to be tough for him to stay fit, but I think that if he does, there's going to be no one stopping Manchester City this season, especially with David Silva might being fit. Yeah, Toure looking for a bounce back season, company as well. They're just a team that everyone underrated just because of their poor performance last season. They didn't win the league, which was their goal last season. But I think that everyone's underrating them at the moment, and they think that Chelsea's going to actually retain their title. So I think Manchester City's going to come first. I think Chelsea's going to come second just because their team is just too good. Eden Hazard, Falcao, they just signed this past season, I believe, on a loan. Diego Costa obviously remains there. Eden Hazard, Oscar, Willian. And I think that the most underrated player in the Premier League, I think he is getting some recognition now, and that's Nemanja Matic in the center of midfield. Chelsea would not have won the title last season without him. He's probably one of the best midfielders in the world at the moment. He's gritty, he's physical, and he just wins back the ball. He's the type of player that every team looks for. Um, so it's going to be really interesting to see what's going to happen with Chelsea this season. Obviously, the Chelsea and Manchester City matches, I believe this season are going to be even more intense than they were last season. Coming in third place, I see Arsenal. And I think Arsenal definitely have a chance to contend for the league this season. I know that a lot of people have been saying this for a really long time about how,
Hmm.
they are title contenders, but they end up flopping, I guess, and finishing in their fourth position, which they have for the past couple of seasons.
Yeah.
But you know what? They have the Walcott bat. They have a good goalkeeper in Petr Cech now. Their team is balanced out. The expectations are kind of low for them. They had no big signing like, Mesut Ozil 2 seasons ago or Alexis Sanchez last season. Expectations are low, so you know what? They might use that to their advantage. And you know what? I could definitely see them winning the league, but I think that they eventually finish third without a proven striker. Giroud is a good striker. I know that. But I know that they are in talks to sign Benzema. If that happens, I'd put them as title contenders. But at the time of recording this podcast, Benzema is still a Real Madrid player, so Arsenal will finish third, in my opinion. Fourth, I have Manchester United. So obviously, with them, they sold one of the best players in the world, Angel Di Maria, to PSG. I have no idea why they sold him. Apparently, it didn't work out at Manchester United with him only spending a one season there. Obviously, he signed for a British world record fee for the Premier League. I think it was like 59 million pounds or something like that. It was something absolutely insane from Real Madrid.
Hmm.
He was, I believe, top three in assists for the Premier League. I believe it was second. And it's kind of weird to see him give up on him so easily, someone with that much quality. Obviously he's a really quick player with relentless on the ball, good skill. So it's gonna be terrific to see what he does at PSG, but I think that's a huge loss. Obviously, some United fans are kind of, they're like, oh, we don't need him or anything like that. He didn't want to be here, so why should we have him here? But you are losing a world-class talent in him. I mean, he was in the team of the season, the world team of the season last year, team of the year actually last year. So he is one of the best players in the world. And to let him go, I think that his presence is going to be missed for sure. So that's what I feel is going to happen. I think Chelsea's not going to retain the title, and I think that Manchester City is going to end up winning the league.
For sure, and I know you mentioned obviously Chelsea there, and you obviously don't think they will retain their title, but I think it's going to be very interesting to watch. Obviously, I know we talked about when we were talking about dynasty teams, and you were saying that Chelsea is going to be a good team for many years to come. So
Hmm.
definitely going to be interesting to watching them facing off with teams like Manchester City and Arsenal. So obviously, when you talk about baseball, you talk about who's going to hit the most home runs. You talk about hockey, you talk about who's going to score the most goals. Well, obviously, we're gonna what we're gonna ask here, who is going to score the most goals in the Premier League and why?
I think that, again, I think it's the same answer as I said last time. Barring injury, there's only one option, and that's Sergio Aguero, the Argentine forward, just turned 27 this season. He has terrific pace, elite dribbling. He's going to be switching to the number 10 shirt, so that should give him extra motivation, obviously, with that being an extremely, kind of holy, not really holy, but like kind of monumental shirt in the soccer scene. Yeah, so I think that Sergio Aguero will definitely be the top goal scorer. I think that, his skill is
Hmm.
definitely top notch, world class, probably top three striker in the world. Um, so I think that barring him staying fit, of course, um, he will absolutely be the top goal scorer. Eden Hazard might challenge him, Diego Costa might challenge him, but I don't see anyone coming close to Sergio Aguero when fit.
For sure. So, obviously we talked about the top players here, and I know you did mention an underrated player. But who are some names in the Premier League that can make a big buzz? Score some big time goals. Maybe some goalies that we should look out for. Who do you think is or that people will be talking about at the end of the Premier League?
I think that one player you absolutely have to look out for, and I think that he actually did score today, kind of coincidentally, is Andre Ayew, who's a Swansea City signing from Olympique Marseille in the League One in France. Um, he's a terrific player. I think he's world class. It'll definitely be, interesting to see what he does. He's obviously, I think he's too good to be on that team. He's going to be transferred out. I think he's going to transfer out midway through or even at the end of next season because he just is too good for that team. I think he's going to prove his worth. Obviously, he did score today as well, so just a coincidence. I think he's going to be an extremely good player. He plays up front, has the pace, has the skill, has good shooting, and can finish a ball as well.
For sure. So real quick here, I know obviously talking here about Premier League, but I wanted to really switch the gears here to our Toronto MLS team, TFC. Obviously, want to give them some love. And one quick question here. Obviously, Sebastian Giovinco, he is absolutely incredible. He leads the MLS, obviously, with 16 goals, even more than David Villa, who I like because of Spain. What are your thoughts about TFC, real quick? Obviously, fans are hoping, for another, maybe a run at the playoffs here. I know Giovinco, I know I don't watch much soccer, but he's been definitely someone that a lot of people are talking about. I don't know if you plan on going to any TFC games in the near future, but what do you think about the state of TFC? Obviously, losing some big guys in this past off season. But what do you think that they're going to
Well,
perform?
TFC actually did lose today to Sporting Kansas City, and they kind of been up and down
Mm-hmm.
over the past couple of fixtures. I mean, they won the time before this past game. They won against Orlando City. And then they lost again against New England Revolution on August 1st, and then they drew against Columbus Crew, and then they won, and then they drew, and then they lost, and then they drew. So it's kind of been an up and down season for them, especially in the last couple of
Yeah.
games, fixtures in the past couple of fixtures. So Sebastian Giovinco, speaking of him himself, he's definitely put the team on his back. He's definitely an upgrade over Jermaine Defoe. Jermaine Defoe wasn't a bad player by any means, but Sebastian Giovinco is just too good for the MLS, I think, at this point. He's a smaller guy. Obviously, we've seen him have extreme success with his creativity, his good dribbling. He's really quick guy. And his tremendous skill. So TFC are extremely lucky to have him, and they're gonna look to bounce back and try and make it into the playoffs.
For sure, Aslam. Definitely good to talk some soccer. We haven't done this in a while. So we're going to conclude our episode here with the question of the week, as we always do the past 12 episodes. So the question of the week, I know we talked about this with Doug, and I know he did have his thoughts on it and some good thoughts there. We're talking about players using social media, and I'll go first here, obviously. It's been, I know a lot of people don't really talk about it, but I think it's something that we should talk about. Let me first off by saying that, you know, athletes are big time players. They're people's idols. They're people's role models. People obviously want to be like them when they grow up. I think it's definitely nice having, being able to follow people on Twitter, and especially if they follow you back. I think that's pretty cool, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
I know on my personal, I like to follow a lot of athletes. I know I follow, obviously, I have to start with, obviously, my favorite Blue Jay of all time, Jose Cruz Jr., who actually follows me. And I know I've tweeted to him a couple of times and he's replied. So I definitely am glad he has Twitter. I know another big person on Twitter is Jose Batista. He's very active. He shares a lot of quotes, here and there. I know especially when there was that Face of the MLB contest, he was following a lot of people. But I mean, if I had to say the most fun person, in my opinion, to follow on social media is Marcus Stroman. You thought he had swagger on the mound. Well, he has more swagger off the mound. He's always tweeting. He's a very pumped up guy, very positive, especially with this whole injury thing going on right now. It's really been nice to watch him and seeing pictures of him working out. Getting back to the top. He's a dream chaser. He says height doesn't measure heart. I totally believe with that. I stand tall with that one there, or should I say stand short. But social media is nice, but obviously there's been cases where players, and it's going to happen. Every player is going to receive love and hate on Twitter, especially. We're talking Twitter here because it's the biggest thing. But I know when Marcus Stroman was making his way up to the majors. I know Ricky Romero, obviously, who went down to AAA, had told him, you got to be careful because it can, especially when you have rough outings, they can really hurt you on Twitter. They can really hurt your game. I know we saw obviously with the Blue Jays with JP Arancibia. I know he got he got basically he got killed on Twitter. I know obviously when he had his comments about Toronto media before he left, he had to end up losing his Twitter account. I think he got off it. I mean, as much as I love Twitter, I think it can be really harsh on players sometimes, especially when they're really young, especially when they're building up their career, when they don't have much, good numbers to prove themselves. I think Twitter can really bring you down. But like Doug said, it's the time of the era that we are in that it's just, it's natural to have Twitter. You definitely have a name for yourself online. I think that's probably a big concern for MLB players and NHL players and NBA players. But what are your thoughts about social media? What do you think about players using it?
Well, I know Doug brought up an actually really good point. I think that social media these days is actually about building up a brand for yourself as an athlete. Um, most players use social media. I think that obviously using it in the right situation, as you guys said, it absolutely is a great tool to use. But I mean, if you say something bad, it's definitely going to come back to bite you. If you have bad performance, you can definitely get rained on by the fans with the bad comments. Obviously, I know the athletes probably receive a ton of the mean tweets, and it can really affect you. So, as good as social media is, it does have a negative side, but I think that the players that are able to, push that out of the way, use social media how it's intended to be used, turn off notifications, don't even look at those, interact with your fans. I think that's terrific for the sport, the fans, and people and the athlete in general.
For sure, I definitely agree, and I think one thing about those hate tweets that players get, people say, oh, they just ignore it, but hey, it's there, and they definitely read it. So I think that's one thing that's really tough, and I think it's actually very interesting now these days that you see players tweeting each other. I think that's becoming more common. I know obviously the whole Jordan Ventura and Jose Batista case when he tweeted some stuff in Spanish to him. Obviously, he quickly deleted it. But, I think it's a good place for people to voice their opinions, share their thoughts. And after all, they're all humans and, there's no point of being someone that you're not, especially on social media.
Absolutely, I completely agree.
For sure. So next week, we're going to talk about some of the top underrated and overrated athletes in respective sports. I think that's going to be really fun because I can already think of a lot of athletes that I think are very overrated. Definitely going to have our opinions there. But I think that's going to conclude our episode. Austin, do you have anything to say?
No, I'm good, man. That was a terrific episode.
For sure. So thanks to Doug for joining us. Thank you all for listening. Obviously, if you've stayed this long, it has been a long episode, and we do apologize in advance. We do thank you very much. We thank you for all your support. Make sure you do follow us on Twitter. Our Twitter links are in the description. Make sure you hit that subscribe button if you want to hear more from the Sports Zone podcast. And hopefully we will be with you guys soon again. And, hopefully the Blue Jays are going to keep up this streak. I hope next time we talk, the Blue Jays are in first place in the American League East. But for Austin and I, we thank you. We hope you have a wonderful day, a wonderful evening, a wonderful week ahead, and we'll see you next time. Peace.